So we just talked about a lot of what happens in the first session of IPT. So just to review, you do a review of depression symptoms, provide education about depression, give the limited sick role, provide some education about interpersonal psychotherapy and what the treatment is going to look like. Typically, that takes the majority of the first session. So what we're going to talk about now is really the remainder of the initial phase of treatment, and in particular, sort of weeks 2 and 3. So again, as we talked about earlier, we start each session by doing a brief review of the symptoms. And then the main purpose of these next couple of sessions is to conduct the interpersonal inventory. And so to do that, we complete something called a closeness circle. And then we review each of the adolescents' relationships in a lot of detail to get a better sense of what relationships may be contributing to or maintaining the depression, how each relationship impacts the adolescent's mood, and how the adolescent's mood and depression symptoms may be impacting the relationship. We always end each session by kind of reviewing what we've done so far and making a plan for the next week. The interpersonal inventory is one of the most unique tools in IPT. I think it's probably the most unique tool, and differs from other forms of psychotherapy in the depth of information that we get. It's a really in-depth assessment of the client's most significant relationships in their life. What we're trying to do in the inventory is identify which issues are most closely related to either the onset and or persistence of the depression. And the primary informant for the inventory is the adolescent. So the majority of time that we're doing the inventory, it's with the client individually. As you saw before, in that initial session that we have with the parent may provide some additional data that we'll use to inform the inventory, but this is really the goal, is to get it from the adolescent's perspective. The way that we've come to do this is we use something called a closeness circle, which provides a visual diagram of the adolescent's relationships. It's sort of a picture of their life. If this was a book, who would be the primary characters in the book, and how are they related to the adolescent? And we use the closeness circle as a way to start the interpersonal inventory. It's a nice first step. It sort of breaks the ice and gives you a sense of how many relationships you're going to want to talk about, and gives you a little bit of a sense of what the temperature is of those relationships. What we do is we ask the adolescent to place the important people in his or her life on the closeness circle. And we want to pay attention to where they're placed, and also people that you may know from the intake that may be missing from the circle as well. So here's an example of a closeness circle. The way we describe the closeness circle is when the client sees it, it's blank. In this particular case, Jessica is our client. And we say to Jessica, Jessica, I want to get a sense of the relationships in your life. We're going to be spending the next couple of sessions really understanding who's important to you, what's working in those relationships, and what's not working. In order for us to do that, I'd like to start by getting a picture of who's in your life at the moment. The first circle outside of you are the people who are the most important to you. These are the people who impact you in either a positive or negative way. These are the people that you would describe as being the closest to you. On the next circle are people who are still important to you. You may not feel as close to them. Your relationship may not be as positive. It may be that you don't see these people as often, but they're still important to you, but for whatever reason, they don't feel as close or as important on the people on the innermost circle. And on the outer circle are people who are still important for me to hear about. These people, again, may not be as important or as close, but you still think that they're important for me to know about you in order to understand your life. So I've provided that explanation, and then I asked Jessica to tell me, okay, Jessica, who would go in the innermost circle? This is important to try and do this in as interactive way as possible, rather than just sort of handing over the piece of paper to the adolescent, because you do get some important information as you're filling it in. You don't want to move ahead and actually conduct the inventory at this stage. You really just want basic information, but it is helpful to have a sense of who people are. So in Jessica's case, she says, my mom, she'd be in the closest circle, and also Carla. Who is Carla? Carla's my best friend at school. So I might just note that. Anybody else who goes in that innermost circle? No, that's it. Okay, well, what about the next circle? These are people who are still important to you, but may not be as important to you as your mom or Carla. Who do you think would go in there? And she says, my grandmother, she lives with us. My uncle, where does he live? He lives about an hour away. My boyfriend, Brian, and Lisa, who is a friend that I grew up with, but we're not in school together anymore. Okay. What about on the next circle? Is there anybody on the next circle that you would put there? John, he's my ex-boyfriend, and also my dad. Okay. I know from the intake that dad is remarried and that there is a half-sibling, both of whom are absent from the circle. And so I may inquire and say, you know, I noticed that your stepmom isn't on the circle and that your half-brother isn't. That's fine, but is it okay if we talk about them as well as we go through the inventory, because I know that they're really, there are some things going on there that would be important for me to know about. Okay. If you know from an intake that it's a grief case or a likely grief case and that there's been somebody who passed away, if they want to put the person on the circle, that's completely appropriate. If they don't put the person on the circle, that would still be somebody that we would want to review in the inventory. So now I have a picture of this person's world. Sometimes it's really telling and provides a lot of information to you in terms of, wow, this person doesn't have a lot of people on their circle. I'm noticing that it's mostly their family and then they only have one friend who's on the circle. That starts to suggest to you that maybe this person may be experiencing some interpersonal deficits or having some difficulties connecting with peers. But it's not diagnostic, so people do this in their own way, and so you don't want to put too much attention into it. So there are certain people, certain cultures where it's only appropriate to put the family on there. It doesn't necessarily mean that, sorry, I'm trying to get rid of that there. It doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have close friends. And then there are other times where people put 15 friends on their circle, and you have the sense that they may be this really social person who is really connected. But in fact, when you actually go through the inventory, you find out that those relationships are really superficial. So it's a good starting point. The other thing I like about doing the closeness circle is it gives you a sense of timing. How many relationships are you going to realistically be able to get through in the next couple of sessions? So we do this in the beginning of session 2, and we're doing the inventory in session 2, session 3, and into session 4. So we have a good amount of time, but if somebody has 35 people on their circle, we're not going to get to everybody, and so we're going to need to prioritize them. If somebody has less people on their circle, I know I have more time to really explore those relationships in a lot of detail. Once we have the closeness circle, we start the interpersonal inventory. We usually give the adolescent the choice of who they want to talk about first. And it is a little bit like an interview at first and can feel a little bit like a question and answer, but quickly it turns into a conversation, and it's really meant to be a conversation about relationships. So typically what happens is you want to ask a bunch of questions about the relationship, and there are questions that we recommend asking about all relationships, but it is also meant to be an interactive process. So when they tell you something, you can follow up with anything that seems interesting to you to learn more about the relationship. For each relationship, we want to find out what's the frequency, content, and context of their contacts. So we know for peers that there are kids who see their peers only in school, in class, but they don't sit together with them in class, they're not IMing with them, they're not seeing them after school or hanging out with them on the weekends. That's a different level of friendship than somebody who you just see sort of in the classroom. So we want to find out sort of how often are you seeing this person, in what context, what do you do together? Sometimes that question seems a little bit strange. When they live with their mother, for instance, you're not going to necessarily find out how often they see their mom, because they're probably seeing them every day. But if their mom is somebody who works the night shift, then you want to find out when are they able to sort of see them and what it looks like when they're home in the afternoon. You also want to find out about what the expectations are for the relationship. And are those expectations being met? What are the positive aspects of the relationship? What do they like about this person? What do they like about the relationship? And what don't they like? And sometimes that's a hard question to ask, particularly when we're asking about people's parents. When you give them permission to tell you something they don't like, they can quickly come up with lots of things they don't like that their parent is doing. Any ideas that they have regarding the impact of that relationship on other relationships and vice versa? So for example, in the brief role play that we saw so far with Tara, it's clear that Dad's relationship with his girlfriend and the girlfriend's expectations for how Tara should behave is impacting her relationship with her dad. So that would be an example of that. Other examples would be with peers when there are peers, but one doesn't like the other person, and so there's sort of a triangle of relationships. And so it's important to pay attention to that as well. What are the positive or negative patterns of communication in the relationship? How has the depression impacted the relationship? And how is the relationship impacting the depression? So we know for kids who are depressed that they often become withdrawn or irritable. So often as we're going through the inventory, that's the answer we get. You know, we used to hang out a lot, but I'm really not interested in hanging out anymore. And so my friends are going and doing things without me. Or I've noticed that I've been fighting a lot more, or arguing a lot more, or every little thing my sibling says really annoys me. It was always annoying, but it's really annoying now. And so we want to pay attention to that. And for each relationship, we want to find out what would they like to change in the relationship? How would they like to improve this relationship if they can? And that question really becomes integral to us deciding which relationships we're going to focus on in the remainder of treatment. So questions that we ask about specific people are, what types of things can you talk to your mom about? What about things you can't talk about? So a typical answer is, oh, I can talk to my mom about everything. And then you say, everything? And then they say, no, I can't really talk to her about boys or sex or things like that. What types of things do you like about your relationship with your mom? You know, I really like that she's a lot of fun. I feel like I can turn to her. She's one of the cooler moms who people can talk to about things. You know, so she's got a good sense of humor. She gives good advice. Those are the types of things that I like. Well, what don't you like about your relationship with your mom? Sometimes she gets over-involved, like I'll tell her something and she'll sort of rush in and intervene at the school or call my friend's mom who I'm having a problem with. And she also likes to tell my relatives about what's going on. So there are times that I feel like I can't trust her because I find out the next family party that everybody knows that this boy broke up with me. So I don't really like that aspect of it. Do you get into arguments often with your mom? And what are those arguments about? How do those arguments start? And how do those arguments get resolved? You know, we do fight a lot. We fight a lot about chores. You know, I don't take out the garbage like I'm supposed to, and my mom gets really annoyed, and I think it should be my sister who does it because she's the one who's making all the mess. What do those fights look like? And in the end, do you guys talk it out? No, we just sort of go back to normal the next day, and then we have another fight a couple of days later. So really trying to understand exactly what's happening in the communication. How do you feel when you're around this person? Is this somebody who impacts your mood in a positive way or a negative way? So we all have people in our lives who, when we're around them, they cheer us up no matter what's going on. And then we have people who, even if we start out in a pretty good mood and we're spending the whole day with them, by the end of the day, we notice that our mood is sort of depleted. We want to know how this person impacts their mood. Have you noticed any changes in your relationship with your mom or with whoever since you've been depressed? And if so, how? Yeah, I do notice, like, I'm not doing as much around the house. So we are arguing more all of a sudden because I used to be pretty good about doing my chores. And she just doesn't understand that I just don't have the energy to do it anymore. So we're fighting a lot more. And, you know, I don't really feel like talking to her as much. I just want to be in my room and hang out on the internet. And so we're not communicating or doing the fun things that we used to do together. And then what would you like to change in your relationship with your mom? Well, I'd like to be able to talk to her about things like I do, but to really feel like it's going to stay between us and that I can give her some feedback that I don't want her calling the school. I want her to give me advice, but she doesn't need to solve it for me. Might be an example of the types of answers an adolescent would give. As you go through the inventory, you're focusing in on specific people. You want to spend as much time as necessary on each person. There isn't great guidelines on how much that is. There are certain relationships that you can go through very briefly and other relationships that are more core to their depression or more integral to their life that you might spend 25 minutes to 35 minutes or longer on. So part of, I think, getting used to the inventory is really figuring out the timing and when you feel like you have enough information. So somebody may have their 3-year-old brother on the circle, and you can probably do that relationship pretty quickly because chances are they're not having heart-to-hearts about how the teenager's feeling about things, but you may still want to review it briefly. And then in other relationships, you're going to go into more detail. But you do want to stay focused on the relationship you're on at that time. So often, you're talking to a teenager, you're talking about their best friend, Sandy, and all of a sudden they start telling you about how Sandy doesn't like Michael, and you have this desire to kind of go to Michael. but you want to note Michael and say, let's go back to Michael later, but I really want to finish on Sandy first. So as you're going through the inventory, you're starting to get some ideas about what may be going on for this adolescent. Are there conflicts in this particular relationship? Are there people that they can't communicate their feelings to? Are there certain ways that they're not able to access support? And so oftentimes as you're doing the inventory, as you've gone through the first 4 or 5 people, you have a good sense of what's going on for them and what their interpersonal problem area may be. But then there are times that you don't. I mean, I think we all know from our clients that there are certain clients who come in who have a very clear sort of interpersonal issue that they want to work on. And then there are clients who come in and they have no idea why they became depressed, and you don't really know why they become depressed, and you go through their relationships and they're seeming okay, particularly because they're telling you about all the positive ones to start with. And so then it can be helpful to ask some questions related to the interpersonal problem areas to begin to get a sense of what's going on for this particular teenager. So how I tend to do this is not to interrupt the inventory, but maybe at the beginning of session 3, when I've done a full session and I don't have a good sense of what's going on, I may ask some of these questions to get a better sense. And if we remember what our 4 problem areas are, these questions are really designed to get at some of those. So is it difficult for you to make friends? And if so, how so? Really trying to get at the interpersonal deficits problem area. Do you have difficulty making transitions, such as from junior to senior high school? Or have there been changes that have happened in your life recently that may be contributing to your depression? Really trying to get at the role transitions problem area. Have you lost anyone significant in your life recently? Typically, if grief is going to be the problem area, you know that from the intake, so it's not usually one that's surprising. But every once in a while, you will find out about a loss, and it's typically not a loss. If you don't know about it, it's typically not a loss that happened recently, but something in their life may be triggering a reaction to that loss later on. Have there been any recent changes in your life? And then I like to ask sort of a general question, which is, what do you think is most closely linked to your depression? Do you have any sense of sort of why you've been feeling this way? Sometimes people's answers are not necessarily particularly helpful. People have very different beliefs about why they've become depressed, but sometimes they do give a very important answer to that, which does link it to a potential interpersonal problem that I want to find out about more. The other thing to think about as you're sort of doing the inventory is, what are you learning along the way, and how can you incorporate what you're learning into your questions about other people? So let's say we know from the inventory that this person has had a recent change in their life. They have just transitioned from middle school to high school, and that their best friend in middle school now goes to a different high school. And so that's been difficult. And we find that out because that's the first person we reviewed on the inventory. As I go through the rest of the inventory, I'm keeping in mind that transition to find out about how that transition may have impacted other relationships that the person is talking about. So I know that you're not spending nearly as much time with Sheila as you used to because she's at a different school. Has this relationship changed? Is this a new relationship from high school? Is this a continuing relationship from middle school? And I can ask some of those questions there as well. Also, I'm using any information I have about patterns in relationships. So if they're commenting on the fact that, I really don't, I know I have lots of people on the circle and this person looks like somebody who's got really strong relationships, but as I'm going through, I'm finding, they talk to me about their problems all the time. I'm really helpful with them. Well, can you talk to them about your problems? No, I don't talk about my problems with them. I don't want people to know how I'm feeling. I'm afraid they'll judge me. I'm going to be asking those types of questions in the other relationships as well to find out if they're able to talk to anybody in their relationships. So you're looking for patterns across relationships as well as information on the specific relationships. The last piece of information about the inventory and the closeness circle generally is that sometimes people like to group people together. So they'll say, these are my high school friends, or this is my grandma and grandpa. And we try to break those relationships apart because the relationships are unique and different. And there may be a group of girls in high school who aren't particularly nice to them and they want to be closer friends with. But there may be one of those friends who they're likely to be able to make those inroads with first. And if I talk about them as a group, I don't get to learn about those differences. So you do want to talk about individuals and not necessarily about groups of people. Okay? I think we are going to, yep.
Just want to add a few things. Just in terms of thinking about how to present the closeness circle in the inventory to adolescents, what I like to do when I work with teens is to try and find a way to bring in things that they're familiar with. So a lot of adolescents, obviously, they're in English class, they're reading books, they're learning about who are the main characters in the story, they're writing papers of that nature. And so I like to explain to them that we're really going to be looking at the story of their life, and what they're going to be putting on the closeness circle are the main characters in their story of their depression. So that's how they can think about it. And what I find helpful, because you may get a kid who's got so many kids on their closeness circle, is that I try and emphasize to them, once we have everybody on the circle, that we're going to be focusing really on 4 to 5 people at the most, is really who we can cover in the amount of time that we have. So I ask them to, once we finish the circle, to look on the circle with me and pick out who they think are the 4 to 5 most important people that we would need to focus on in the initial phase. And then I give the kids the opportunity to pick the first person to talk about. They get the choice of the first person, but after that, I, as the therapist, will pick the other people, because as I talk about more and more people, I'm beginning to get a sense of who I really need to focus on. And I have limited time, so I don't want them to go off and talk about somebody who isn't going to be crucial to their identifying what their problem area is. The other thing, as Jamie said, about oftentimes the father that's not playing an active role in their life, or the dad who they're really angry at, or the stepmother isn't on the circle. I often sort of play around with the kids and sort of ask them if, it may be important, the fact that they're not on the circle, and could they find some place to put them even if they're not in the circles, because I try and make sure I'm going to remember to talk about them. So they put them in the corner of the sheet. I have kids who put them on the other side of the piece of paper. But it sort of helps me to get a sense that way of how alienated they are from this person, and then how much this alienation may be playing a role in their depression. The other thing is, Jamie talked about searching for communication patterns. It's important in a short-term therapy, when you're looking at these communication patterns and you're getting examples of what happened in that conversation with somebody, what happened in that argument, how did they manage it, how did they get a solution or not get a solution. You also want to be looking for their strengths in communication and their strengths in relationships, because you don't want them to feel at the end of your inventory that they're not good at anything in any of their relationships. And in a short-term therapy, we're also building on their strengths. So you want to, while you're also looking at things that are going to need remediation, you're also looking for things that they do well in certain relationships. So you can say to the adolescent, you know what, you have a really good relationship with that person. It seems like you communicate quite effectively with them. What we want to figure out is how you can communicate effectively with this other person who you're currently having more problems with. So you want to emphasize not only that they're having problems with certain people, but look, I can identify that you are good at certain things with certain people, and we're going to figure out how to generalize that to more relationships.
Can I just add on to that? That was the thought I was trying to have before. I think the other thing is that sometimes we have a tendency to want to rush through those positive relationships in the inventory. You're kind of doing it. It sounds like a really positive relationship, and so you want to move on, but you don't, because you can use the overarching goal of IPT is both to address the problematic relationships, but to increase the positives and build support. And so if you have somebody who they have a good relationship with, and they're not necessarily going to spend as much time with or not accessing as much as they could, it's very important to find out about that relationship. And we've had examples in cases where those people have been really important. So an example of that is a case that we saw where the girl had a really difficult relationship with her dad. She had a closer relationship with her mom, but the person she really spoke to about her problems was an aunt. And she would spend her weekends with the aunt, and they liked to cook together. And when they were cooking, she would be able to really talk to her aunt about things. And we were able to use her aunt in the middle phase of treatment to really get her to problem solve with her aunt and role play and practice. And she used her aunt in that way to prepare herself to have more difficult conversations with her mom and father. So building on strengths, I think, is a really important piece.
The last point I want to make is a lot of times when therapists are learning to do the inventory, one of their criticisms are, you're spending so much of the first 4 weeks gathering information from the adolescent. How are you helping them to be motivated to come back when you're not starting to do skills immediately? And I think it's really important that when you're noticing the patterns and you're noticing things that are going to be important for you to talk about in the middle phase, that you do what I call marking them. So you may say to an adolescent, it sounds like this conflict with your mom over being able to go out with friends and have people over after school. It sounds like that's something that's really linked to your sad mood and really making you feel a lot worse. This is something that I think I can help you with, and this is something that we're probably going to come back to in the middle phase, because I think there are skills that you can learn to make this situation go better. So you're marking it for them that you've heard it, you've acknowledged the importance of it in terms of their depression. You're also giving them a message of hope. I have things that I feel I can teach you. I have skills that I can give you that are going to make this go better and going to make you feel better. So you're not able to start immediately doing those skills with them, but you're gathering that data and you're telling them, I hear you, I'm listening, I've made note, we're going to go back to it, I think I can help. So that's an important part of the inventory, is identifying those things that you feel you're going to go back to, identifying places and skills where you think you can be helpful, sharing that with the adolescent, giving them hope for the next phase of treatment.
And sometimes the teenagers really do make changes on their own. I mean, I think the other thing is we're not prescribing change in the inventory. We are marking it to work on later on. But sometimes you'll do that mood rating at the beginning of session 3 or session 4, and the adolescent will come in and say, oh, I had this conversation with my mom, because we're getting them to start to think about what's going on in their relationships. And so often they will start to do the work and will start to feel better during that initial phase. And I think that's something to think about as you're doing it and struggling a little bit with just sort of doing an assessment, that we do see change in those first weeks. And particularly for teenagers, this is also a wonderful rapport building technique, because who else wants to hear about all the details of their relationships? So, I think sometimes people are like, oh, really? But the adolescents are like, can I tell you more? And I want to put this new boy, I really like this new boy, can I add him to the circle? And then you get to hear about them. And so they really have the sense that you know the people in their life in a level that no one does. And I think it is very different from sort of just doing an intake and finding out about the people in their life. So the adolescents tend to really like it. And they quickly learn the types of questions that you're going to ask. And so it really becomes much more of them telling their story and you intervening a lot less in terms of asking questions.
And I liken it to sort of the process of peeling an onion. You start out with more superficial questions as you're training the kids in how to talk about their relationships. And you're peeling back, so you may start with superficial details, and then you're going to get into examples of events that happen in these relationships. And then you keep peeling back, well, how did those things make you feel? And what happens when you're feeling that way? So you're constantly going deeper and deeper into their relationships as they learn this process. And it's very powerful for them, because rarely does somebody ask them what their opinion is of their relationships and what they'd like to change about them. Most of these kids come in, they're depressed, they feel pretty powerless in their relationships. And part of this process is really empowering them to say that you can be an agent of change in your relationship. And it's not going to take a huge, you're not going to push a huge boulder up the hill. You're going to possibly change just something in the way that you speak to somebody, in the way you say things, in the way that you problem solve. And it's not this humongous task that we're asking for. It's tweaking little bits and pieces of how you conduct your relationships that has a snowball effect and can have a very large impact on that relationship and therefore their mood.
Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to role play. So Tara, as we were talking about last week, the focus of this treatment is really on improving your relationships, with the thought that as we improve your relationships, your mood will also start to improve.
Okay.
In order to do that, what I'd like to do over the next few weeks is really learn about the important people in your life. And I use something called a closeness circle to do that. It's sort of a picture of the important people in your life, like telling the story and who are the important characters. Okay? So it's just, I'm going to draw these like a bullseye. Okay? And you're going to go in the middle, and then there's going to be a few other circles. Okay? So this first circle here are the people who are the most important to you. They affect your mood in either a positive or negative way. They're the people you feel the closest to and are the most important in your life. The next circle here are people who are still important to you, but you may not feel as close to them. They may not be as important to you as the people in here. And then the outer circle are for people who you still think are important for me to know about. You may not feel as close to them as the inner two circles, but they're still important and impact your mood. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. So we have you in here.
Okay.
So who do you think you would put in sort of this innermost circle?
Definitely my mom.
Okay. Anyone else that would go in there?
My sister, Lisa,
And how old is she again?
13.
Okay. And anyone else that goes in there?
Probably my boyfriend, Eric.
Okay. I know from when we talked about last week that sort of him not being at school has been hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But we're still
Anyone
close.
else that goes in that innermost circle?
I don't think so.
Okay. What about this next circle?
Well, I guess my dad.
Okay. Anyone else?
And one of my friends.
Okay. And what friend is that?
April?
April? And is April in school with you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Anyone else that would go on that circle?
That's pretty much it.
Okay. What about on this next circle?
Well, I guess I'd have to put my dad's girlfriend there,
Okay. And her name?
Sue.
Okay. What about other people?
And her two sons. There's James and Tom.
Okay. Okay, so we have Sue, Tom, and James. Is there anyone else that would go on that circle?
And this one other girl at school who's a friend of mine.
Okay.
Her name is Gabby.
Okay. Okay. So I feel like I have a pretty good sense then of the people who are most important to you. If you discover over time that somebody else comes to mind and you want to add them in, you can just let me know.
Okay.
So what I'd like to do now is really get a good sense of these people and these relationships. And I'm going to ask a lot of questions just to try to understand more what's working in the relationships, what's not working. So is there somebody that you'd like to start with first?
I guess probably my dad.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about your relationship with your dad.
Well, as you know, my parents are divorced, so I see my dad once a week, and sometimes more often because he'll have every other weekend with me.
What's that like for you when you spend time with him?
Well, I don't know, it used to be better. It's just kind of like, I feel like we argue and we just get pissed at each other.
Can you tell me a little bit about what those arguments look like?
Well, he just keeps, I don't know, it's like when I'm at his house, he expects me to act like it's my own house, but he doesn't do anything to make it feel that way.
So what do you mean by that?
Like, I have to buy my own stuff when I go over there, and it's just ridiculous. It's like, come on, like, can't you spend a little bit of money on your daughter?
Right. What types of things do you have to buy for yourself?
Like, I like a certain snack, and he knows that. You would think that when I'm coming over, he would just have it. And there's certain things that I really don't like to eat, and so you would think that it would be important to have stuff that I like.
But he hasn't done
No, I just have to remember to bring them over.
that. And is that something that you've talked to him about before?
Well, I never said it like the way I'm saying it to you, like that obvious, but I kind of mentioned like, oh, there's nothing to eat around here. He just doesn't seem to get the hint.
Okay. So that sounds like one thing that really makes you feel like it's not really your home,
Yeah.
even though he wants it to feel that way. What else about being over there makes it difficult for you?
It's just Sue's two sons, he keeps trying to like force us to hang out and be a family, but they're not my family. Like, that's ridiculous.
Okay. So that sounds like that's been a point of contention between you and your dad.
Yeah.
What does he do to communicate that he wants you to act like a family?
He'll just, if we're all in the house, he'll try to say like, oh, why don't you ask James how his day was? Or, why don't you go over and see if you could, talk to Tom a little bit more? It's like, well, I'm just relaxing. I'm just like sitting there and reading a book. And then you expect me to stop what I'm doing and try to ask these guys. Why don't they come and ask me?
Right. And so what happens if you don't? Like if he tells you to go over and talk to James or to do something with Tom and you sort of stay reading, what happens then?
Well, usually, sometimes I'll do it, especially if it's obvious. But if I could get away with it, I'll just roll my eyes and sit there and kind of ignore him. And then later he'll I know he'll say something. He'll just be like, oh, should be more, friendly. He'll kind of say it like during dinner or later.
And how do you feel when he makes those comments?
Well, I just think it's unfair. Why do you put it all on me to do that?
So it's feeling like it's mostly your job to be the one to sort of initiate that.
Yeah.
Okay. So it sounds like that's a real problem when you're there, is sort of feeling like you don't feel quite at home because your stuff isn't there. And also just that you have to sort of act fake in some ways with, James and Tom.
Yeah, I don't think James and Tom care. I mean, they're teenage boys. It's like my dad and Sue that seem to think it's a big deal.
Okay. Okay. So you mentioned before that things used to be better between you and your dad. Can you tell me a little bit about what things were like before?
I guess he would, instead of me always having to go over there, he would come over to us and spend time at our house.
And what types of things did you do when he would come over to your house?
Well, sometimes he would take us out, like just for a day out. And other times, like maybe we'd cook dinner together,
Okay.
Something like that.
And it sounds like you liked those times better?
Yeah, especially if if my mom had to work late or something, he would come and make dinner with us.
Okay.
And that was really fun. But he almost never comes over anymore.
When did that change?
I would say about maybe 3 months ago.
Okay. So really recently you've noticed that you just haven't been doing as much with him.
Yeah, it might have been before. I don't really.
Okay. Okay. And so now the expectation is that you're mostly spending time together at his house?
Yeah, I don't know why.
Okay. And what do those times look like? So let's say it's a weeknight and you go over to his house. Can you take me through what that looks like?
I just go in, I say hey, and if I have homework left to do, maybe I'll do it. He usually asks me. And then it's, sort of getting ready for dinner, and my dad and Sue usually just do that. I don't really help out. So I'll just watch TV.
And do you talk to your dad when you're over there? I mean, does he ask about your day or other things?
He'll ask how school went. Like when I walk in the door, he'll ask me. But then after that, it's pretty much like he's hanging out with Sue in the kitchen, and then I'm watching TV, and then we'll have dinner.
Okay.
And dinner, we talk a little bit. But then after that, he's watching TV.
Okay.
And it's like we're just kind of doing our own thing for the most part.
So it sounds like even though you're over there, you're kind of doing separate things for the majority of time other than dinner.
Yeah.
Okay. How does that feel for you?
I guess I don't understand why I have to go over there. Like, why can't I just stay at my own house, in my own room with my stuff if we're just gonna sit and watch TV separately?
Okay. So that sounds hard.
Yeah, but my mom also makes me go there too.
So it's not really your choice?
No, neither of them really give me a choice.
If it was your choice, how much time would you spend with your dad?
Maybe like just every other weekend instead of on the weeknights. It's hard too because I have to go to school, so it's rough to have to stay over somewhere else.
Okay. So ideally, it would be seeing him more on the weekends. And it sounds like you'd also like to be doing more things with him the way that you did before, either cooking dinner together or maybe going out on those excursions rather than just sort of being there. On the weekends, is it any different when you're there with him on the weekends?
Well, he'll make more of an effort to do something with us, but usually he'll try to include Sue's sons, like James and Tom. You know, will usually have to come along, or so we can't just do something. Like, I really like going to art museums sometimes, but James and Tom hate it, so we never get to go. And I know that my dad likes to go, but he won't go anymore because we have to force them to come.
Have you ever talked to him about maybe spending more time alone with him or with you and your sister?
I just don't know how to bring that up because I feel like he doesn't want to.
Okay, so it's been hard to bring that up. Okay. And so when you're spending the day with him, how are you noticing that it's impacting your mood or how you're feeling?
Yeah, I'm just like really crabby and kind of like annoyed and not in a good mood.
Do you think he notices that?
Yeah, he makes it worse.
What does he do?
He'll make these comments like, "Uh-oh, you look like you're in a bad mood," and then he'll say that in front of everybody.
How does that make you feel?
Well, it's not something that I need broadcasted all over the world.
So those comments sound...
And sometimes I'm not even in a bad mood, but he'll just say it, and then that puts me in a bad mood.
Okay. So it sounds like right now, when you're around him, you're kind of feeling irritable, and it's worsened by the fact that he'll make those kind of comments. Okay. And has he always sort of made those types of comments to you?
Well, no, because I haven't always been like this, so...
So do you notice that sort of since you've been feeling depressed, the relationship has changed with your dad?
Yeah, I think that we're not close at all. That's why, maybe before I'd put him on that inner circle with my mom, but I just don't feel like we're there.
Okay. And what specifically do you feel like has changed since you've been feeling down?
Talking to each other, doing stuff.
And how much, it sounds like part of that seems to be that he's not suggesting those things anymore. But do you feel like maybe you're sending a message somehow that you don't want to be spending that kind of time with him?
Yeah, because I don't want to go over there. Okay. So I guess I am in a bad mood.
Okay.
I think that stresses him out if I'm over there and I'm not like the perfect daughter when Sue and James and Tom are around and I'm not like pleasant, I think he probably gets stressed out by that.
Okay. What about your dad do you like? So kind of thinking back, particularly when things were better, it sounds like you like to do things together, but what else do you like about your dad?
He's pretty open to doing the stuff that we like. I mean, he'll say yes and he'll participate. Or he used to. He doesn't do that anymore.
Okay. So that he's open to sort of doing things.
Yeah.
And when you used to do these things together, or even now when you get time, I don't know if you ever get time, just the two of you, do you notice that it impacts your mood in a positive way?
Well, I mean, I was in a better mood before
Okay.
when we were doing stuff.
Are there other things that you like about him?
Yeah, I mean, he's nice. He, like, if I need help with something in school, he's pretty smart, so he'll help me out. And he doesn't, like, yell at you when you get something wrong in school.
Okay.
So he'll...
It sounds like school is one thing you guys can talk about or that he checks in with you about.
Well, at least how I'm doing in school. Like, I don't really talk about my school friends or anything with him.
Okay. Are there other things that you find difficult to talk to him about?
Not wanting to hang out with Sue and James and Tom all the time and pretending to be this, like, happy family.
Okay. What about, like, with Eric or, how things are going or how you've been feeling? Can you talk to him about those things?
I used to, but I think he kind of gets uncomfortable.
What does that look like?
He just, he likes Eric, so he'll ask how he's doing, but I don't think he wants to hear details about our relationship.
Okay. And what about in terms of how you've been feeling or how this has been a really tough year for you? Is he aware of that?
Well, he definitely notices it because he says, "Oh, you are crabby again today."
Okay.
And I'll try to joke about it as if, like, that's going to get me into a better mood, but it just doesn't.
It sounds like it, in fact, makes it worse.
Yeah.
Okay. So you don't feel like you can really talk to him about what's going on in terms of your feelings.
No, I don't think I want to either.
Okay. And are there things, other than what we've talked about, it sounds like there's a number of things that have been challenging with your dad, but are there other things that you don't like about your dad or about your relationship?
I think those are the major things.
Okay. And, when you're able to talk to him about things like school, it sounds like he can be helpful if you're having a problem. Are there times that his reactions to you aren't so helpful?
Yeah, like he'll try to correct me, or like even if we're just sitting for dinner, he'll be like, "Sit up straight," have to look nice when you're sitting up, or like when I was playing soccer, I was just playing around and he was telling me that I wasn't, like, kicking the ball correctly, and that's just annoying because we're trying to have fun.
Okay. So it feels like he's making a lot of comments to try and make you do things differently.
Yeah.
Okay. And since you've been sort of feeling this way and have sort of been less interested in going to his house, has he talked to you about that at all?
No, he just says that, "Oh yeah, I know you don't want to go, but it's my turn."
Okay. Okay. And it sounds like there's a lot going on with him in terms of just sort of not wanting to be there and feeling like when you're there, it's not, really the kind of time you want, and that he's forcing things with Sue and her kids. Are there things you would like to be different in the relationship?
Well, I don't think that James and Tom care if we're best friends.
Okay.
So, I'm old enough to know how I should be with people. So it's kind of ridiculous if he tries to tell me that I should go and talk to them and ask them about this. So I wish he would just stop trying to force me to act a certain way around them.
Okay. So that's one thing you'd really like to be different. Anything else you'd like to be different?
Well, if he actually wants to welcome me in, I would appreciate if he, has some of my stuff there and lets me keep some of my stuff there.
Okay. So sending some sort of message to you that you're welcome there and you're really a part of the family.
And not always having to be with their family. They live with him, so they get to hang out with him all the time. I feel like if I'm there for a weekend, then I should get at least some time where I get to do an activity or something with just my dad and not Sue and her kids.
Okay. So also getting to spend sort of unique time. Would you be okay if your sister was involved in that time, or do you really want sort of one-on-one time?
I guess both. I understand my sister is going through probably the same thing, but even if it's a little time, just that everybody, sits in the living room while the two of us make dinner this time, that is fine.
I realized I didn't ask you, do you and your dad argue about things?
Yeah, I mean, we'll argue about that, the way, it's like, oh, you're rolling your eyes, and I'll say, no, I'm not, that kind of thing.
Okay, so it's more him making comments like, you could have said that nicer, or you're rolling your eyes.
Yeah.
Are there times where those arguments escalate?
We don't scream
Okay.
or anything. It's just kind of like, I just stop talking and just roll my eyes and go somewhere else.
Okay. So it's more sort of you withdrawing.
Mm-hmm.
And then what happens the next morning or when it's time for dinner?
We'll just be like, hey, have breakfast and do our own thing, and that's it.
Okay. So it doesn't sound really like there's a lot of fighting necessarily going on, but just sort of a disagreement about sort of how things should be in the house.
It's just being annoyed at each other.
Okay. And do you get the sense that he's annoyed? He makes those comments to you. Do you get a sense that that's because he's annoyed at how you're acting?
I think so.
Okay. Is there anything else about your relationship with your dad that you think is important for me to know about? Okay. So just to sort of reiterate, it sounds like in terms of changes, it would be figuring out a way to feel more at home there, which really involves him putting in some effort in terms of having your things and finding time for the two of you to spend time alone or with your sister. And it sounded also like those comments that he makes kind of make things worse instead of make them better. So that would be another thing that would be important for you, for things to be different.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that those are things that we can really talk about as we move on in treatment, because I know that when you're over there, you're pretty unhappy right now. And so I think if we can make a change in that relationship, we may see some changes in your symptoms. Does that sound okay? Okay. Would it be okay if we sort of moved on
Okay.
to a different relationship? Could you tell me a little bit about Eric?
He's been my boyfriend, and he's really nice. He's in college now, but I still get to see him a lot.
Okay. When did you guys start dating?
We've been dating for 2 years.
Okay, so it's
Yeah.
been a long time. And what types of things do you do together?
Well, lately it's been just like hanging out, watching TV. Sometimes he'll come over and make dinner for all of us. But we used to do more stuff before. I just haven't wanting. He likes to do stuff. He likes going outside and going for a run or going for a bike. But I just say no.
Okay. So that's been a real change recently for you.
Yeah, because I used to do more of that. Sometimes I'll go on the weekend with him.
Okay. So it sounds like, similar to your dad, there's been some changes in your relationship lately with him.
I guess so. I mean, the biggest thing is that he graduated, so I used to see him every day.
Right. So why don't we start there? Can you tell me a little bit about what it was like when you guys were in school together?
So it was really awesome. We would see each other every day. We even were able to change our schedules so that we could have lunch together.
Okay.
And it was pretty fun.
And outside of school, what types of things did you do together? It sounds like you used to do more stuff.
Yeah, we would sometimes, if he didn't have to go home right after school, and he would come over to my place because my sister's at home, so I have to go home after
Okay.
school. So we would just have like a snack together and start our homework. So we'd spend a lot of time together, and then, sometimes my sister will bug us to like play with her, do something with her. I mean, just going outside and biking, or maybe even taking her to the mall for a little bit. So he was pretty cool about that.
And it sounds like he was really involved and spent a lot of time at your house.
I mean, he still does.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what about on the weekends? Like, did you guys go out, just the two of you? Did you spend time with friends?
Yeah, his friends, mostly his friends, just because they're really cool. So we would sometimes hang out with his friends, sometimes, because during the week if we hang out, he would have to come to my house usually because of my sister. But during the weekends, I could sometimes go to his house.
Okay. And what do you like about Eric?
He's really nice.
Okay.
And he really is, he's really open to hanging out. He knows that I have to be home after school with my sister, and he doesn't care. He doesn't ever like force me to like go do what he wants to do instead.
Okay. And when you were seeing him every day, what types of things could you talk to him about?
Everything.
Everything. Mm-hmm. So would he know if you were having difficulties with your dad? Mm-hmm. What about things at school with friends?
Well, I mean, I mostly have his friends,
Okay.
so, but everything was cool with his friends.
Okay. So you could talk to him about that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Say something happened with your mom or your sister, he'd be the person.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what did he do in those moments for you? Like if you told him about something that was going on?
I don't know, just being nice.
And did you feel better after talking to him about it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it sounds like he was also, not only did you spend a lot of time with him, but he was a real source of support.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I feel like I've got an okay sense of sort of what things were like. I know things really changed when, he graduated. So can you tell me a little bit about what your relationship is like now?
Well, I guess we still see each other a good amount, but not as much.
How much is that?
Maybe like twice during the weekdays, and if I'm not at my dad's, then I'll see him during the weekend. But now that he's in college, he has more stuff that he has to do.
Mm-hmm.
So he'll have to like sometimes meet with the study group or whatever, and he can't just come over and do what I want to do.
Okay.
And we just kind of been on and off a little bit ever since.
What do you mean by that?
Like, I kind of broke up with him like a couple of days ago.
Okay.
But I broke up with him before that too. But I mean, we usually just get back together. I just get frustrated sometimes and I'll just say it.
Okay, so can you take me through the example from a couple of days ago? What happened?
Well, I feel like I am just not, he should just be with somebody who can do those things that he wants to do. And right now, I just want to sleep and watch TV and, just do what I have to do. And I can tell that bothers him. Like, I can tell that he wishes he could take me to a college party or, take me for a biking day or whatever, but I just don't feel like it. And instead of, holding him back, I was just like, let's just break up.
Okay. You say you can tell that he isn't okay with it. How can you tell?
I mean, who would like that? I know he likes to do those things, so he must be, I guess I might as well break up with him before he breaks up with me.
Okay. So was it that you had a particular fight in that moment, sort of a couple of days ago?
Well, he's really nice, so he doesn't really fight with me, but I will, sometimes, I feel bad. Sometimes I say things to him and I'm kind of mean to him, and he just doesn't say anything back, which is really, it doesn't sound like it's frustrating, but it really is.
So that makes you more angry?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like, why are you being so calm? This is annoying to me, and I'm telling you that you're annoying.
Okay.
And there's nothing.
He just sits there.
He's just like, oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. And so then what happens?
And then I'm just like, forget it, and I storm off.
Okay. And it sounds like in that particular circumstance, you sort of said, let's end it
Yeah.
to him.
I was just like, you know what? I don't think that we like the same things anymore, so.
Okay. And what was his response when you did that?
He was so upset. Yeah.
So what happened after that?
Well, he just said that I can't. So this isn't the first time I broke up with him, so I guess he's actually getting frustrated.
So what did he say?
He was just like, oh, you can't do this to me anymore.
Okay.
I don't know what that means, but.
And then did things get resolved?
Well, I haven't really talked to him, so.
Okay. So it sounds like things have changed in a couple of different ways with him. I mean, first of all, there's just the real tangible changes of not seeing him as much because he's not at school, and also because he's just more busy at college. But it also sounds like since you've been feeling depressed, you haven't wanted to do some of the things that you've wanted to do before. And as we talked about, that's one of the symptoms of depression. And it sounds like that's been really hard because you've been spending more time at home. And it sounds to me as if you feel really guilty about that.
Yeah, I feel bad about it. He's a really nice guy. So that's why I'm like, go spread your wings somewhere else.
And it sounds like you feel guilty because, like, why wouldn't somebody be annoyed? But just to be clear, has he communicated to you that he sort of wants things to be different? I know the different about breaking up, but what about different in terms of the way you spend time together?
I mean, he says it's good for me. He's like, oh, he doesn't, it's not like my dad who will be like, oh, you're turning into a couch potato, but he'll say like, oh, exercise is really good for you. You used to really like this. Let's, try it out. I know you don't want to go, but when you start, you'll have fun. And he'll try to convince me, and I'll just like scream at him. And
so that makes you annoyed too.
Yeah, he's not a doctor or like what.
Right. Okay.
He's trying to tell me.
And in terms of sort of the relationship, it sounds like you're not 100% sure where things stand right now, but if you could sort of imagine it being different.
Well, he'd probably get back together with me if I called him.
Okay. And what would you like that relationship to look like? How could it change for you?
I guess I would like to do those things again with him, but I don't know that I can do it. I just really don't want to.
Okay. So possibly doing more stuff, but right now, with the way you're feeling, that doesn't feel so possible.
No.
Okay. And are there things you'd like to be different sort of in how you guys talk about things, or?
Yeah, I guess if he would just, like, I will scream at him, and I'm like, dude, have a backbone. Like, why are you letting me scream at you like that? And, like, I guess I'll admit it. Sometimes I kind of, like, scream even more to see if he'll say anything back to me, like, stop treating me this way. But I guess the closest he's ever come to that was when I broke up with him a couple days ago. He said, you can't do this to me anymore. But he's still, like, super calm. I just want him to understand that people have emotions and they're not always happy emotions.
Do you feel like he understands your depression and sort of what you've been experiencing lately?
Well, I haven't told him.
Okay.
So
he doesn't know that you're here seeing me?
no, I think that would be kind of awkward, especially because we're broken up.
Okay.
I feel like I'm already kind of a burden as it is, because he's like just hanging out with me, watching TV, and even like cooking for us and being really supportive that way. Like, why would I tell him this? And then that's like another thing he has to deal with.
Okay, so it feels like if you shared that with him, that would be burdening him in some way. Does he know, so maybe he doesn't know about your depression, but does he know about how things have been more difficult for you since he's graduated, or what things are like at school now with him gone?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's pretty obvious. I've complained a couple times that I don't really have as many people to hang out with at school because he graduated and so did all of his friends, and they were my friends.
Right. So you've sort of complained about it, but you haven't talked about it, sort of. And that sounds to me a little bit different than what you described as well. I mean, it sounded as if last year he was the person you could really talk to about things that were going on. Are you noticing that you're talking to him less about things that are upsetting?
Yeah, because I mean, he's in college. He has something new going on, so maybe I shouldn't keep telling him all this stuff.
Okay.
I feel like it doesn't fix anything either. I'll tell him and he'll say, oh, that's too bad. Well, you still got me. And I'm like, all right, well, thanks a lot.
So do you think he has any sense, sort of like when you break up with him and you're sort of frustrated or feel guilty, do you think he has any sense of sort of what's going on or where that's coming from?
Maybe a little bit, but I just feel like he doesn't understand emotions very well.
Okay. So you think part of it may be that you're not telling him all of it, but that he may not also get it?
Maybe. I don't know, because I never tried to say that directly.
Okay. So it sounds like right now we're sort of uncertain where things stand with him, but that if possible, you'd like to be able to kind of get things back to the way they were a little bit more. But it sounds like you guys also need to figure out what this relationship looks like now that you're not in the same school. Does that sound about right?
Yeah.
And the other thing you mentioned was just sort of when you're angry and irritable, and he sort of just takes it, that doesn't always feel great either, and kind of makes you more angry or just want to get a reaction from him. So maybe also figuring out how you can communicate a little bit more to him about what's going on for you. Does that seem like something that you might be willing to work on in here?
Yeah, so would I have to get back together with him before I do that?
Well, I think that's something we need to figure out. I think right now I'm still trying to figure out who the people are in your life. And it sounds like this has been a relationship that's been really important to you for a long time. And I think as we move forward, we can kind of talk about, if that's something that you're interested in doing, and if you are, sort of how we can make some positive changes in that relationship so that you can get more of that support back from him again.
Okay.
Does that sound okay? Okay. Does anyone have any questions about the role play or about the inventory? Yes, I'm very much paying attention to that piece. I may not be saying it outright there because I want to be sensitive to the fact that they may not be aware of it yet or willing to acknowledge it, although she was pretty aware, I think, of how her irritability and her sort of withdrawal had impacted the relationship. And I think even with Dad, she was pretty aware that things had changed partly because she didn't want to be over there as much. And was more withdrawn when she was over there. So I am very much looking for that. And I think we want them over time to be able to acknowledge their role and also communicate their role in those interactions so that it would be sort of acknowledging, I understand that I'm not the easiest person to be around right now, but this is what I'd like to talk about so that both parties are aware. And that really is, our belief here is really that relationships are cyclical, and so it's never just one person, or it's rarely just one person who's causing all of the problems. We're contributing to it. And I think that is another important question that people sometimes ask, or adolescents will sometimes say to me, in the case of Tara, like, well, why isn't my dad here? Like, he's the one who needs treatment and not me. And then we sort of work on getting them to recognize that if they can change their communication, that'll impact the relationship. And so we, in fact, get parents to do the work without them being there, and often that'll allow them to buy in a little bit more to what we're doing. Do you have a question? I think we try to use the words they're using, and so if you have somebody who doesn't really acknowledge a lot of depression symptoms but describes being bored or not interested, then I might use those words as I'm explaining to them. But partly because we've done the assessment and then we're providing education about depression, we do think having some insight into the fact that they have a mood problem is important. And so we can change the terminology. I do a prevention program and the kids aren't depressed, so I would never use the word depressed, but they will acknowledge having some symptoms. And so, since you've been feeling sad, have you noticed that there are changes in the relationship? Or since you've been feeling bored or annoyed? So I try to use some of the language that they're using. And I think it is important to make sure that they understand what you're saying, when you're using those terminology. But we're also starting each session with a symptom review. So it shouldn't be completely surprising to them that we're talking about, depression because we've educated them that these are the symptoms. We're asking about sadness. We're asking about the other symptoms.
Though it is a very verbal therapy and it does require some insight so that it is not easily done with kids who have a very low IQ, so that it does require some average level of intelligence. Kids who have learning disabilities can do it, but it takes longer. It may take more than 12 weeks if you're working with somebody who has a receptive or expressive language problem, because it does require a lot of verbal expression. and processing of verbal material. So you have to think about that in terms of your population.
The back. Yes, but not nearly as many as you would think. Again, I think they're interested in telling their story, and I think part of it is being allowing them that choice of who to talk about first is really helpful. Some kids go right to the heart of the issue, and others avoid by talking about a really superficial relationship first, but it gives them some control over it. And I think they then get used to it. And for those annoyed ones, I think they start to give you the information without you having to ask the question, so you stop. So I think the majority of adolescents don't get annoyed. I think that there is sort of a subset that do. But I think partly because you're trying to get their perspective on things, it's helpful in doing it. And so I having done this, both of us, a lot and supervised a lot of people, it's been really rare. I mean, there are ones who aren't as forthcoming as Tara was, or don't have as much insight necessarily, and so then your questions are a little bit more concrete, but usually they'll answer stuff.
The other thing is that you make it overt. I acknowledge, I know I'm asking you a lot of questions, but here's how come I'm doing it, what the point of it is. And I think if you can acknowledge that you're aware that you're asking them, but you can also explain your motivation and what it's going to lead to, then they're less likely to get annoyed. I think kids get annoyed because you're doing something and they don't know why you're doing it and what the benefit of it's going to be for them. And if you can explain that, then it's not as problematic for them.
We'll do one more question. We're really flexible about parent involvement. So even if they live with their parent, sometimes the parent doesn't want to be involved or they don't want their parent to be involved. So, I mean, I think it's very flexible in that way. And so you could go and do this straight as an individual treatment, and that would be fine. Oftentimes we may decide to involve somebody who isn't their parent, but their foster parent or other person that they're involved with. But it's okay to also do it just straight as an individual treatment, and we've had a lot of success doing that.
I mean, usually we do like to at least introduce the treatment model to whoever their caretaker may be. So it may not be a parent, it may be a grandparent, it may be a foster parent, but unless they're 18 or older, they're generally living with somebody. And it's that somebody who may be important to involve, at least in the psychoeducation part in the beginning. We've also had flexibility where the parent doesn't necessarily attend sessions, but we may check in with them on the phone to sort of keep them updated on the progress and what we're working on so that they can sort of be apprised of that as they go along, even though they're not actively participating. But we have done it largely with some kids as an individual treatment, but you have to be careful that there's somebody who's involved, who's monitoring them as well as you if they're really depressed outside of the therapy session. So it could be somebody from a foster care agency who meets regularly with that child, but presumably that child's living with somebody.
Okay.
So what we want to do now, we're going to show you Tara's closeness circle. But what we'd like you all to have is the opportunity to practice what you just saw Jamie doing with Tara. And so that we want you to break up into dyads and take an opportunity to practice doing the inventory, exploring one of the other people on the closeness circle. And in your dyad, take turns. First, one of you can be the therapist and one of you can be Tara, and then switch. What we'll do is we have about 20 minutes, so we'll give you 10 minutes to do one role before you switch with the other. And Jamie and I will walk around the room sort of coaching you and checking on you and giving you some pointers about how to do it. And then at 1:45, we'll break for lunch.
And we think this is important both for your ability to practice this, but this is also a really active treatment, and we ask our adolescents all the time to role play with us. And we know it causes anxiety. It's caused anxiety for us doing this, in particular in front of a camera. But this is sort of what we ask our teenagers to do all the time. So it's important to have that experience of what it's like to be asked to do something that you don't feel 100% comfortable with. So we will sort of circle around the room. Feel free to ask questions, and we'll give pointers as well. So you should do one of the relationships that hasn't been done already. So you can do mom, we haven't talked about Sue, the sons, or the sister, or we don't know anything about her friends. So you can go ahead.